All right, there we go. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Miguel Lozada. I'm the current president of Puerto Rico Lacrosse, for those who don't know me. Tonight is going to be a very special night because it's our first installment of our cultural heritage webinar series that is going to be led by Dr. Ismael Carreras. He's been part of our program for some time now. Ismael is very well versed in Puerto Rico, and part of our mission for Puerto Rico Lacrosse is to connect our players and to connect the people who follow us and support us with our island, and to learn more about everything that we've come from and where we are now. So I don't want to take too much more time, and Ismael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Gracias. Hola y bienvenidos a todos. Sorry, I'll stick in English. I am Dr. Ismael Elias Carreras Castro. When I'm with Puerto Rico Lacrosse and my people, I use all my names, right? So I have the pleasure of serving as the special ambassador for Puerto Rico Lacrosse. I'm based here in Lexington, Massachusetts, in the northwest suburbs of Boston. You can see my contact information here. I think some of you we've communicated via email, or I've got my Instagram here as well for those who want to follow me. So based on a conversation that I had with Miguel, I put together a 3-part series that covers the themes that you see here. And over the last 12 months, I've given 2 talks, talking about my story and elements of Puerto Rican heritage and culture. I gave a talk to many of my colleagues at the University of Massachusetts, where I work. And then I gave another talk to the women's senior training team. And both of them followed this format of a single half-hour kind of presentation with a Q&A. And I've decided in this series to cover these topics a little bit more in depth. The prior ones, I did all 3.5 hours. This one, we're going to break them up so we can cover a little bit more ground. And so I've added some more material. Now, I'm an academic. I have to be mindful not to keep going on and on. So, and I think I've done a pretty good job here. In fact, I pulled out a couple of slides that I'll leave for the Q&A part if there's time to go over them. So, but, just to be fair, we are literally just scratching the surface. It's probably even less than that. It's like a mosquito bite, to be honest. So just a couple of very quick ground rules. I think we have Miguel here who will help handle some of the technical issues while I speak. And please keep your mic on mute. Each of the sessions are going to be structured in the same way, probably about a 30-minute presentation. Then we'll open up to questions. If you have questions or comments along the way, feel free to use the chat function, and we'll keep track of that. Now, one thing that I want to be perfectly clear is that I'm going to stay away from politics in these presentations. I have my own opinions. I'm not going to share them here. We're going to focus on just basic facts, evidence, and my personal experiences. So don't ask me about Puerto Rico's political status. I'm not going to answer that here. There isn't enough time, and there certainly are not enough adult beverages. Okay. So session 1 is designed to cover a little bit about the Puerto Rican experience, particularly for those based here in the States and sorting out the complexities of our heritage and our identity. So this image here is from Flamenco Beach in Culebra, which lies to the east of the main island of Puerto Rico and just north of Vieques. And this beach is consistently rated as one of the best beaches in the world. Constantly, it's number top 10. Now, the big object that you see here is a rusted out World War II tank that's covered in graffiti. You may be wondering what that's doing there. Well, for many years, the public lands in Culebra were used for bombing practice by the US Navy. This started in about 1936 and really heightened in the late 60s as a result of the Vietnam War. And it's around that point, probably 1970, 71, where Puerto Ricans began to stage nonviolent protests against the military. And by 1975, the US Navy left Culebra and consolidated all of its military activity on Vieques. there are still several tanks on that beach because there's no way to dispose of them. Like, how do you get rid of a tank on a tiny island when the military has left? So they've been left to rust, and the locals have painted them in different colors and patterns. And I think it just speaks to the resilience, resourcefulness, creativity of our people. And that's something never to underestimate. So we're going to start with a quote from a book that I picked up as a young adult, probably would have been around 1992. It's called Latinos, a biography of the people. The author is Earl Shorus. It's a part history, a part case study about the Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine, whichever one you want to use, experience in the United States, which is pretty ambitious. It's an ambitious effort, given that we are not a monolith. And that book largely focuses on Mexicans, Cubans, and Puerto Ricans. That book is still available on Amazon. Now, Shorus was a writer and a journalist from El Paso who came from a Mexican and Sephardic background. It's an interesting book. Some of the case studies, some of the family portraits are a little depressing. And at times I found, I'll be honest, I found it a little hard to connect. But there's some really interesting observations and insightful observations about different groups in the book. And this one comes pretty early. In fact, Shorus leans on other people, other academics, sociologists who define some of the different features of the various Latino groups in the US and what it means to belong or to become a member if you're an outsider. So when he talks about Puerto Ricans, this is what he has to say, right? With us, it's about how well you know the island and where you come from. And after I read this, I began to notice something. When I would meet a Puerto Rican for the first time, inevitably, the first thing that comes out of their mouth, or one of the first things that come out of their mouth, was the question, where are you from? And I see this happening over and over again. In fact, I talked about this with my father this past summer on a recent, he, in a recent conversation, probably about a month ago, he said, do you know that in the last 6 months since you've told me that, which I never really paid attention to, every single Puerto Rican who I've met has asked me where I'm from within the first 2 sentences. That's 11 people, all right? And so we start to laugh about this. And we've even coined a name. We call it the Puerto Rican test, right? Now, ojo, look out. They're not asking you where you are living now in the US. They're asking where you and your family come from in Puerto Rico, and they want specifics. You can't just say San Juan. They want to know the barrio, they want to know the neighborhood. And they're testing your bona fides about your Puerto Rican background and your connections to your heritage. And you have to know where you and your family come from if you want to be considered, part of us, so to speak. Now, it's true other people do this, right? If you're from the same city or you run into someone from this, you're meeting somewhere in an unusual situation, unusual location, and you find out that someone's from the same state as you, or from even, from another country if you're abroad, you get asked this right away. But I'll argue that we kind of take it to a different level, that it's more than just like a geography test. There's something deeper to it than that. Now, it could be that they're trying to suss out, the BS, are this person really Puerto Rican or not? Well, there's probably a little bit of that, right? But we're also a small island archipelago. And we just have smaller degrees of freedom, smaller connections that just come up in surprising ways. And we're trying to explore that. But I also think that beyond that, it's deeper, because our experience as Boricuas is unique, it's challenging, and it's sometimes isolating here in the US. So we want to make sure that that connection is true, because if it is, then there's a certain comfort of knowing that we're among our people, right? It's being in a place that you don't have to explain so much. Well, what does it mean to be, what is Puerto Rican? What is that, right? Well, you're not the only one, and you can just be who you are because people just get it. And that's where that's about. Now, this image here, some of you may know, some of you may not know this is actually from Viejo San Juan, and it's a mural of the basketball player Carlos Arroyo, who played in the NBA for 10 years and played for Team Puerto Rico for 15. That's an image from a famous photo of the 2004 Olympics when he led Team Puerto Rico to an amazing victory over Team USA. So that's very, very famous snapshot. So as Puerto Ricans, as Boricuas, we all have a story. I could go all night about my story. We don't have that kind of time. So I'm just going to talk about my story quickly through 4 dimensions or 4 lenses, and that I'll walk through, that I think each Boricua faces when you either grow up here in the States or you spend a significant amount of time living here in the US. And I hope each of you, as I'm going through those, thinks about each lens and how maybe that's shaped your experience and your identity as a Puerto Rican. So my story begins here at the Colegio Bautista de Carolina, which is the Baptist School of Carolina. This is a K-12 Christian school. It's very well known in the San Juan metro area, particularly because of its strong sports teams. And I begin here for 2 reasons. Number one, this is where my parents met. They were high school sweethearts and were members of the first graduating high school class in 1965. And so I literally wouldn't be here if they've never met at the school. Now, just a really quick aside, my father comes from a small family. He was born in New York City, and his family lived in the Bronx in Hunts Point until he was 10, when his family decided to move to Puerto Rico. He first settled in Caguas, and then they moved to Carolina. My mom's side of the family, however, is enormous, right? Her father was one of 7 brothers, and there were 3 sisters too. And we can trace our family back 8 generations in Carolina. So my mom's last name is Castro. And if you were a Castro from Carolina, 2 things were true. One, we were related, and 2, you attended the Colegio Bautista de Carolina. You had no choice. Why? Well, that's the second reason why this is I begin here. My mother's uncle, my great uncle, was the Reverend Felix Castro Rodriguez. He was the executive pastor of the overseeing church, and he was the one who founded the school. The church was very popular, and he was a well-known figure in the community. And when he passed away in 1985, hundreds of people went to his funeral. Even 2 governors of Puerto Rico, the ex-governor Barceló and the current governor Hernández Colón, went to pay their respects at his funeral. And there's even a public middle school in Carolina named after him. And so after my father graduated from the University of Puerto Rico, he became the physical education teacher here for the entire school. And I even went to kindergarten at that school for a month. And who was in my class? My cousin, Elias Castro, of course. All right, so we'll first start talking about our connections with Puerto Rico. Some of us have spent lots of time there. Some of you have had the benefit of even spending each summer, with family or relatives there. Others less so. Others, have gone very rarely, or maybe haven't even had the chance to go at all if you've spent all your time here in the States. This is me behind my house in Carolina. Before you guys give me the test, I lived in Jardines de Carolina, which is in the barrio Martin Gonzalez in the center of town. My grandmother lived in that neighborhood. She lived 4 houses down from us. And I remember that neighborhood. I remember running around. I had 2 friends, Orlandito and Pepito. We used to run around the streets. And I went to the kindergarten for a month. And then next thing I know, we moved to West Hartford, Connecticut. And I didn't know any English when I arrived. My father had taken a new job as a teacher in the Hartford Public Schools. And we were only supposed to stay for 1 year. But my parents changed their mind because of all the opportunities they saw for me and my brothers. And so we ended up staying. And we didn't spend much time going back to Puerto Rico when I was young. It was simply too expensive for us. We did not have a lot of money to go back and forth. And when I was a child, I only went back once. We went when I was 8. My father and I went to go to my father's sister, my aunt, my Titi Jolene's wedding. And since then, since that time, I've only been back about 5 times in the last, almost 5 decades. But the last time I did go back was in 2019, before the pandemic hit. Well, what I can tell you is that when I return, when I go to Puerto Rico, it hits me differently. And there's a song I think about when I'm in Puerto Rico. I know everybody loves and probably thinks about Mark Anthony's Preciosa, which is an amazing song, don't get me wrong, but that's not the song that I think of. I think of a different song. It's a song by Ruben Blaze called Todos Vuelven, which means everyone returns. And it's a song about leaving home and longing for your homeland and recounting all the memories that you had when you were there. And I break it down in a couple of slides at the end if we have a moment. But for me, there is something that is just so nourishing for my soul to be in Puerto Rico. It's like the sun, the air, the sea, the earth surround your senses and just say, welcome home, son. So. The second thing is just thinking about, community. We as Puerto Ricans, we value that strong sense of family and community. There's a joy, there's an energy that happens when we get together. There's a volume. The volume just increases substantially. All right. And if you're not Puerto Rican, you don't understand that. Some of you may live in or near a community that has a substantial Puerto Rican population. Others live in communities where there are a few who share a culture, and it's that sense of community that keeps our connections to our culture alive. Now, we live in the suburbs where there were a few Puerto Ricans, but we were close to Hartford, which, as many of you know, has a very substantial Puerto Rican population. For us, we had to make a special effort to tap into that community. I remember when we first arrived from Puerto Rico that we would spend a lot of time shopping in Hartford, to the grocery stores, because that at the time was the only place where you could get, those ethnic specialties. I remember we had to go to a barber shop that was in Hartford, so that my mother could explain exactly what she wanted in Spanish. So she had to schlep, me and my 2 younger brothers, to go into Hartford. And that was quite a bit of effort, right? It's 20 minutes one way. When we had more convenient options in close by in West Hartford. And so my parents did have some friends. They did make some connections with Hartford, but I think over time, those connections just became, less so. Eventually, though, other family members began to move to the US. My dad's sister, my Titi Jolene, she moved to Connecticut about 30 minutes away in a house that was out in the sticks. Both sets of grandparents moved to Kissimmee. My mom's brother, my uncle, and his family, they went there as well. So we'd see them in the summer. It was usually just a couple of weeks a year, and that was it. Sometimes we'd go at Christmas time. We never flew, we drove. It was a road trip, and it's 76 Volkswagen bus, which was a blast, but that's how we did it. But those trips were pretty sporadic. So this is me. I think I was probably 4 with the Colegio de Bautista de Carolina women's, that was the girls varsity volleyball team. That's my mom there on the left. I didn't crop her out. The photo was already cropped, so don't throw daggers at me or tomatoes. All right, so some family traditions, right? Most of our traditions were centered around food, because that was the easiest thing for us to do where we lived, given that we were pretty much the only Puerto Rican family in our community. We have rice and beans, arroz con gandules, the rice with pigeon peas a lot. We love tostones, fried plantains. As a kid, I love bacalaitos, the fried codfish fritters. but they stink the whole kitchen up. And eventually my mom got tired of making them. Now, fortunately, my wife, who's American, enjoys Puerto Rican cuisine, as do my daughters. So we make rice and beans a lot, and I make a killer pastelón. My wife and I tag team it, and it's great. I'll say more about it when we talk about food in a later session. Now, in my family, we tended to put more emphasis in terms of like holidays and celebrations. We tended to put more emphasis on Christmas Eve, Noche Buena, and have a traditional meal of pernil. We always had it. And also, when I was young, probably through about age 10 or so, we did celebrate Three Kings Day on January 6th. I remember we had our shoe boxes. We would go out, and sometimes it was the snow, to dig up and try to get the grass in there. And you leave that next to your bed so that the three wise men and the camels bring presents to you by your bedside when you wake up in the morning. But you know, you only do that to about your 10 because you just outgrow it. All right, the last thing I'll say here is just about Spanish, you know, the ability to speak it. This one's important, but it's also complicated. It's a complicated dimension of our experience because of our unique relationship with the US as a territory. And I put our experiences on a continuum depending on how much Spanish was spoken in your house. So, you know, on one extreme, you have families where speaking Spanish inside the house was strictly enforced by the threat of the chancleta from your mother, the flip-flop, right? If you didn't speak Spanish inside the house, she would threaten to beat you with the chancleta, or you got the silent treatment. And that's a pretty powerful and effective source of motivation to speak Spanish. Now, you may have hated it as a kid, but as you've gotten older, maybe if you're an adult, you're probably thanking your parents for that experience now that you can actually speak Spanish. Then you've got the other extreme, where you have families where Spanish was not spoken at all. And some of you lived in communities, or your parents lived in communities where it wasn't safe to speak Spanish, or that they felt it was going to limit your opportunities. You know, I've heard stories, even amongst our community, our Puerto Rico Lacrosse community, of family members being threatened for speaking Spanish, or that, you know, by not speaking good English, you get tracked in remedial education. So, you know, some of you may look at that as regret, as not having that opportunity, but just remember, it's never too late to learn the language. Now, in my family, we were sort of the middle of the extremes, right? Spanish was always around the house growing up. My parents would speak it. It was on the radio. It was on a TV. It was never discouraged, but it wasn't enforced at the dinner table. And my parents told us that was intentional. That was their strategy, because they wanted us to fit into our community and be able to take full advantage of the opportunities, the athletics, the academics, the other extracurriculars. And so they kind of made it our choice in terms of how much or how little we wanted it in our lives. But, you know, a lot of kids just don't have the foresight to make that kind of choice. And so among me and my siblings, I'm the only one who can speak it at a high level, because I committed to it in high school and college. And I think it was because at a young age, I was old enough to remember how life was like, what life was like in Puerto Rico. You know, I have memories of those experiences, and I wanted to be able to maintain that connection to my heritage, to my culture. And to do that, you know, Spanish would give me that opportunity to do that. So, you know, now in my older, you know, I committed to studying it, but I admit that I did have to go to Spain to really learn it. I lived there for almost 4 months, doing a semester abroad in college, and it was a fantastic experience. I really got to finally understand and to use it. And so now in my older age, I'm speaking it at every opportunity. When I can. If I'm in the stores and I can tell that someone's probably a Spanish speaker, I'm going in head first with the Spanish, and I don't care. I'm now having phone calls with my parents, mainly in Spanish, which is awesome. And largely with my mom, we speak in Spanish, but even with my father, who growing up, the only time he spoke to me in Spanish was to give me secret instructions on the soccer field that he didn't want other people to figure out from the sidelines. But even that's starting to change. We're now speaking more and more in Spanish. All right, so on being Boricua, it's important that we understand there are those who want to define for us, for you, who is a Puerto Rican. And recognize that there's some in the lacrosse community who don't recognize that you're Puerto Rican enough to represent our nation. We've seen this in the social media comments about people not being able to speak Spanish or not spending time on the island, or that you don't look Puerto Rican, right? And that last comment about not looking Puerto Rican cuts both ways. It cuts multiple ways. That you may look too white or you look too black, which is completely ridiculous. We even sometimes get this from our people in Puerto Rico, right? And I think that probably comes from a place of jealousy. They see you, from the other teams, they see us as a threat. They don't understand our experience, and they don't understand the worlds that we're often having to navigate. And yet we have every right to represent Puerto Rico based on the Olympic Charter. So don't take the bait. Our stories are different, but if you have a legitimate claim to represent us under our flag, then that's good enough for us. That's good enough for me. I mean, even Jasmine Camacho Quinn, the 100-meter gold medal hurdler, at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, had to address these questions, and she's been addressing them since 2017. So don't let those negative experiences question your own identity or limit, your opportunity to claim or reclaim your heritage, as the case may be. You do have to put in the work, but there are people who can help you on that journey in this organization with your family and friends, who can help you get in touch and embrace that side of your heritage, your culture, the language. So these are just some family photos, just quickly going from the top here. That up in the upper left, that's me and my then girlfriend, my now wife, almost 27 years at our college graduation. I was at Bates College. Up in the middle, that's me with my cousin Elias Castro. That would have been in 2010. We're at my uncle's house, his father's house. Yes, that is, for those of you who know Julia, yes, that is little Julia. She's 3.5 in that photo. And then the upper right there, that's me with my cousin Criseli. We call her Kiki. She lives down in Florida. That's her husband. That's my father. Kiki is Elias's sister. I hadn't seen her in 25 years, and we met up in Florida in 2019 at the President's Cup National Recruiting Tournament. And then down below are some family photos there. On the left, that was at the Castillo de San Felipe del Morro. Julia's 6, my daughter Caroline's 12. That's Julie and me at the U19 World Championships in Canada. I think that was after we beat Hong Kong. And that was Julia's high school graduation this summer. So for being a small nation, we have produced many athletes and teams that compete on the world stage. From left to right, we have Carlos Arroyo, during his when he torched Team USA at the 2004 Olympics. Monica Puig in the middle, the tennis player and first Olympic gold medalist, male or female, to represent Puerto Rico. And we heard La Borinqueña, our national anthem, at the Olympics for the first time. And then, of course, Jasmine Camacho Quinn, our latest superstar. We saw her, win the 100-meter hurdles in Tokyo, and on the podium, she wore the Flor de Maga in her hair, just beaming with pride. And so I always say that, even though we are small, we are mighty. And as an athletic nation, we punch well above our weight. And it's our international teams that are really important to us. Sure, I mean, all athletes have pride for representing one's nation. That's not unique. But for us, I think it means just a little bit more, because it's one of the few times where we demonstrate our sovereignty. That is, when we are officially recognized as a distinct people, as a distinct culture, and we get that recognition on the world stage that we deserve, but rarely get. So when you play for Puerto Rico Lacrosse, you're not just playing for yourself and your family. You represent the nearly 9 million people, 9 million Boricuas in the world, roughly 3 million in the archipelago, 5.5 million in the diaspora. This is not the Puerto Rico Lacrosse Club. This is far bigger than that. And this is an opportunity for you to come together, to come as you are and show the world the best of who we are as a people. The women's program has had the fortune to grow as a unit over the last 3 to 4 years. And they've really embraced our heritage and our traditions. The women's team call themselves the Tainas, which is a great name that honors our indigenous ancestors and acknowledges the indigenous origins of the sport. And you can see here in the photo on the right that at the U19 Canada tournament, the team wore bomba-inspired dresses and had a pendant with the Taino symbol of the coquí. So I guess I put out a challenge to the men's team to think about what tradition they'd like to introduce that honor our heritage. I think that would be amazing to do so. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to leave some resources here for you. I'm going to copy them and throw them into the chat if I can. Here we go. And then I'll walk through those. Okay, so just going from top to bottom. The first is the La Brega podcast. And some of you may have heard me talk about this before. This came out about a year ago, and it is a wonderful podcast that features stories about the Puerto Rican experience. Each episode is available in both English and Spanish. There were originally 7 episodes, but they just released an 8th one in January. It is excellent. And actually, I think episode 5, the Basketball Warriors or Guerreros de Basket, should be required listening for everybody who represents our team at our official tournaments this summer. This is a behind the scenes account of the events in that team, the Team Puerto Rico that beat Team USA at the 2004 Olympics. When you go on that webpage for episode 5, you're going to see a cartoon of 2 birds playing basketball on the court. One of the birds is going to be pretty obvious because it's the bald eagle, and that bald eagle is wearing the US jersey. The other one is a different bird that is wearing a Puerto Rico jersey. And that bird is what we call the pitigre, or the gray kingbird. I'm going to say more about the pitigre in session number 3. But just so you understand that allegory, we often are represented as pitigre, as that bird. When I was Puerto Rican, there's a memoir by Esmeralda Santiago. I'm reading this right now, about halfway through. The author it's a memoir where the author talks about her life as a child in Puerto Rico in the 1950s. She lives in a rural barrio of Toa Baja. And then later on, she moves to Brooklyn with 7 of her siblings. And it's pretty interesting just to see the experience, as she is a kid. I haven't gotten to that part where she's in Brooklyn, but eventually she makes it and graduates from Harvard. So it's a really interesting story. I've also attached an article about what some of the feelings you may have about growing up as Puerto Rican here in the U.S. And this idea about what makes someone Puerto Rican enough and who gets to decide that. So that one I think you'll find interesting. And then the last one here is an episode from NPR's Code Switch podcast that talks about racism and colorism in Puerto Rico. This is not something that's talked about, and it pains me to say that, but it does exist. But what I love about this particular episode is that at the very beginning, I mean, it's a great episode, no mind you, but one of the cool things about it is that it references a song that comes from a famous poem called "Y tu abuela, ¿dónde está?" That poem is basically calling out the hypocrisy of Puerto Ricans who deny their African ancestry. Because pretty much, just about every one of us has branches in our family tree of African ancestry. And I put actually a link to that poem in the chat. And it's the original poem in Spanish, as well as a really good English translation. Now, for those of you who can read in Spanish, if you've never read that poem, you're going to look at it and say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't look like Spanish at all. And you have to understand that it was written, the Spanish was written phonetically, as if you were reading what someone might speak our Spanish with a Puerto Rican accent. So keep that in mind. But it's a great poem. So that's it, mi gente. I have this running joke with my parents, particularly with my father. When I sign off on a phone call with them, I say, y eso fue lo que trajo el barco, which is an expression that you'll hear in Puerto Rico. It translates to, that's all the boat brought. But it means, hey, that's all I got for you today. There's nothing else. That's it. Okay. So thank you. Let's open it up to questions. I haven't been following the chat, Miguel, but if there are no questions, or if we've got some time, I've got 2 more slides that I'll quickly go through, and then we can wrap up. So I'll open it up. If you want to use the raise your hand, if you've got anything, then great. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say I really love this. I don't have heritage in Puerto Rico, but I do have Afro-Caribbean roots. So it's just very interesting for me to learn about this. And then for our team, NPR's Code Switch segment is really great. Not just speaking to Puerto Rican heritage, but a lot of racial and social issues across the board. I really love listening to those segments, and I related a lot to some of the things that they had provided on there. So I highly recommend you take the time to check that out.
Well, thank you, Chris. And yeah, it's great. And I think you would really appreciate, given your background. I take a look at the poem. I think you'll really enjoy reading it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, who's next? Now they're stunned into silence.
Mel, I just wanted to emphasize something that you when you were speaking, when you were talking about Esmeralda Santiago, you cut off a little bit. When you were saying where she had graduated, it came out as if she had graduated from Hartford. And what you meant to say was she graduated from Harvard.
Yes, so my apologies. She did graduate from Harvard. So if my signal cut off, my apologies. Yes, so it's a wonderful story. How someone from rural Puerto Rico, what we might call a jíbara, person from the campo, campesina, ends up in Brooklyn, and then finds her way to Harvard. And she's written now, I think, at least 3 books. So she's she's become a well-known author in her own regard. All right, I think then since we have a little bit of time and then we can wrap up, I'll share the two slides that I held out because I think they might be interesting for folks. So, and then we can say, wrap it up. Okay. So, I mean, I love Ruben Blaze. You know, his music is amazing. Just the music just stirs something inside me. His real strength is in his lyrics, and his songs tell these like elaborate short stories about scenes and situations across all of Latin America. And he's won 14 Grammys as a result of, you know, his throughout his career. So his song "Todos Vuelven" comes from his 1984 album Buscando America. The album is fantastic. Now, the thing about this particular song is that he didn't write it. It's a rearrangement of a very popular Peruvian folk song by the writer Dr. Cesar Miró. That, in fact, many Peruvians kind of consider that "Todos Vuelven," the Peruvian Indian version, as the second national anthem. But Blaze rearranged it as a beautiful salsa. And years later, there's actually a segment on YouTube where he commented how the original Dr. Miró in a television program with Ruben Blaze says how pleased he was with the arrangement. So, you know, as I said before, the song is about the feeling people have, you know, that nostalgia for home. And this is the first verse that really does it for me, you know, when I hear it. And just the quick translation here is, everyone returns to the land where they were born, to the incomparable spell or bewitching of its sun. Everyone returns to the corner where they came from, where perchance a love bloomed. So it's an amazing song. I highly encourage that you know, if you guys have never heard it and you like salsa, you definitely want to listen to that and pay attention to the lyrics. The other thing, since we're on lyrics and poetry, is this is part of a very short poem. It's a famous short poem by the Puerto Rican writer and politician Luis Llorens Torres, titled La Mancha del Platano, or the stain or mark of the plantain. So the translation here is, plantain tree, to you I owe the stain that neither soap nor the iron can take away from me. Now, the plantain stain is a symbol of pride for the Jíbaro, you know, what we call the country folk or people who live in the mountains of Puerto Rico. Many of the Jíbaro are farmers who really understand how to work the land. And what happens is that when the farmers cut down the plantains from the tree, that tree releases a sap or resin that gets on your clothes, and it's next to impossible to remove. So when we say like La Mancha del Platano, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor in two ways. If you're from the countryside, if you're from the campo, you know, it's about having that pride of being a Jíbaro, you know, that's you know, your rural heritage, and you're taking pride in that. But it also applies more globally to Puerto Ricans in general. And so when you say yo tengo la mancha de plátano, that means that I'm Puerto Rican. And like that stain cannot be removed. It never washes off. You will always be Puerto Rican. So I will leave you with that. Miguel, any closing thoughts or anything else?
I was just about to close this out. I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It was very informational. Ismael, thank you again for putting this together. Again, like I mentioned in the earlier part of this meeting, this is going to be one part of many series. And as we continue, we want it to be a little bit more of an open dialogue. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat and we'll go over that at the end of the evening. As well, we're going to be posting this on YouTube. We recorded the whole interview, the whole session. So if anybody wants to rewatch it, we're going to have the link out. We're going to post it on our social media. And I just want to say, everyone, thank you for coming. And Ismael, thank you for this presentation.
Bueno, saludos y muy buenas noches a todos.